Welcome to the mathematics of juggling. In this video, we'll talk about counting site swaps. If you haven't watched the video on juggling cards, I suggest you do so because we use those cards to count the site swaps. Here's the site swap 6716, which is a 5-ball site swap of period 4. Our juggler friend is showing us this pattern over on the right. 7562 is another 5-ball site swap of period 4, as is D151. Now remember that D represents a throw height of 13 because we take the convention that A is 10, B is 11, and so on. We have 3 5-ball site swaps of period 4 listed here. In general, how many 5-ball site swaps are there of period 4? And that's what we'll be doing with our counting. We'll vary the number of balls and we'll vary the period. Now we're going to allow some extra counting to take place. For example, we'll use some patterns that are fundamentally the same, but count them as distinct, and then we'll allow some what I call imposter period 4 site swaps to play in as well. 6716, if you take that throw height of 6 and move it to the back end, you get the new site swap 7166. And if you take the 7 and move it to the back, you get 1667, and then you can get 6671. Fundamentally, from a juggler's perspective, these are the same site swap, but we'll count them as 4 different site swaps. On the other hand, 9191 we would think of really as a period 2 site swap repeated, but we're going to count it among the period 4 site swaps. This will help us with our counting. In another video, we'll talk about how we can exclude these repetitions. In general, we're going to ask the question, how many b-ball site swaps are there of period n? In the juggling card video, we talked about Ehrenborg and Reedy's result, which said that there's a 1-to-1 correspondence between site swaps of period n with at most b-balls and sequences of n juggling cards from the deck D sub b. So here is 6716 as represented by 4 cards from the deck D sub 5. Here is 7562 also as 4 cards from the deck D5, and D151. Now these are period 4 site swaps and we get 4 cards. We're going to review the deck D sub B in general. Here's the deck D sub 5, which has 6 cards. We know it's D sub 5 because it can represent up to 5 balls being juggled, which we can identify because there are 5 lines moving across these cards. If we take 4 cards from this deck, we'll create a site swap. Sometimes the site swap will have all the way up to 5 balls, but in this case, this site swap is the site swap A330 or 10330. The average of those values is 4, which means this is only a 4-ball site swap. Why is it not 5? Because we have this one path that moves all the way across those cards and never falls. On the other hand, if we take a different sequence of 4 cards, like this one, this is the site swap E330. E represents a throw of height 14. This is a 5-ball site swap because the average of 14, 3, 3, and 0 is 5. And the reason we know it's a 5-ball site swap is because we have that top path falling down. It turns out that as long as you have that particular card, you will have a 5-ball site swap. And if you don't have that particular card, you'll have fewer than 5 balls. So fewer than 5 balls are juggled when we only use the first 5 cards from the deck D sub 5. So let's do just a little preliminary counting and then we'll generalize. Initially, I picked one of these 6 cards to go first, and then a second card to go second, and so on. I'm allowed to repeat, so for each of the cards I had 6 choices, so there are 6 to the 4th different sequences of 4 cards I could come up with. However, if we want to include only 5-ball site swaps, we want to get rid of all of the site swaps that are created when we don't use that last card. That is, we want to get rid of all of the site swaps that are created when I only use the first 5 cards. So instead of having 6 choices for each of the cards, I have 5 choices for each of the cards. So we're going to subtract 5 to the 4th, which is 671. I'm going to show you all 671 of these site swaps, sort of. Here we have all of those 671 site swaps in some form or another. In green, we have those that will produce 4 different site swaps if you start shifting the throws at the beginning of the site swap to the end. There are 15 rows and 11 columns, so there are 165 of these site swaps. Each will produce 4 site swaps for a total of 660. On the other hand, in orange, we have those that are period 2 site swaps repeated, and those only produce 2 each if you just move the first one to the back. And then 5, 5, 5, 5, no matter how many times you move a 5 from the front to the back, it's still only going to represent one site swap. So there's our 671. Now let's generalize the argument about how to count site swaps. The period n and the number of cards will be the same number that we use when we create site swaps from the deck D sub B. When we use cards from deck D sub B, you can get site swaps that have 0 balls, 1 ball, 2, all the way up to B balls. We saw that deck D5 had 6 balls. In general, deck D sub B will have B plus 1 balls. So if we're going to lay out n of these cards, we'll have B plus 1 choices for the first, for the second, for the third, and all the way out to card number n. We have n cards overall that we need to make a selection for, so the number of site swaps is simply the product of n factors of B plus 1. The number of period n site swaps with at most B balls is B plus 1 to the nth. In our example with 5 ball site swaps of period 4, we had a subtraction problem, and that was because we wanted to exclude the site swaps that had fewer than B balls. So B plus 1 to the nth is the number of site swaps of period n with B or fewer balls. We want to get rid of those that have fewer than B balls, which means we want to get rid of those that have B minus 1 or fewer balls. The first and third statements are almost identical. In the first one, we're saying we're looking at site swaps with B or fewer balls, and there are B plus 1 to the n of them. In the second statement, we're looking at B minus 1 or fewer balls, which means that there are B to the n of those. In order to count the number of site swaps with exactly B balls, we're going to subtract these two numbers. It's going to be the B minus 1, B plus 1 to the nth minus B to the nth, and we're going to denote that as the number n of nb, capital N of little nb. So just to check, if we use the formula with B equal to 5 and n equal to 4, we get the 671 that we had before. Now for a couple of examples. How many site swaps are there of period 10 with at most 6 balls? So it's 6 or fewer. In this case, we're going to use the formula B plus 1 to the nth. How about fewer than 4 balls of period 8? Well, since we don't want to include the 4 balls, we would have just the B to the nth formula. So that's 4 to the 8th. What if we want of period 12 with exactly 3 balls? Now we need to use the formula for capital N of NB. We're going to have B equal to 3, N equal to 12, and so we'll get B plus 1 to the nth minus B to the nth, which turns out to be 4 to the 12th minus 3 to the 12th. On the other hand, what do we get if we have a period 5 site swap with exactly 9 balls? B is 9, N is 5, and so just as before, we use the B plus 1 to the nth minus B to the nth formula to get 10 to the 5th minus 9 to the 5th. And for the strangest example of all, what if we want it to be period 6, but we have at least 7 balls, but no more than 11 balls? Well, that's kind of strange. So we want 11 or fewer, at most 11, so we'll use the B plus 1 to the nth formula with B equal to 11, but we want to exclude those that have fewer than 7. So we use the B to the nth formula when B is equal to 7. 11 or fewer minus fewer than 7. So it's going to be 11 plus 1 to the 6th minus 7 to the 6th, or 12 to the 6th minus 7 to the 6th. Well, what can we do from here? Earlier, we talked about the patterns 6716 and 7166, 1667, 6671, all being counted as different site swaps, when in effect, as a juggler views them, they're the same. How will we count them if we lump those all together as one? And what if we want to say that 9191 should not count as a 4-ball or a period 4 site swap, but instead as a period 2 site swap? Those are what are known as exact period site swaps. Or you might want to explore bounded juggling. How many b-ball site swaps are there of period n in which all the throw heights are less than n? Now that's a rather specific example, but that's probably the easiest that we'll be able to calculate. So we'll start off with a video of that, and then later move into a more general bound when all throw heights are less than h.